Jake Morrison sat in the dark corner of his quarters aboard the old battlecruiser Vengeance and stared at the empty bottle in his hands. The ship floated dead in space near Titan Station where nobody bothered him anymore. 5 years had passed since the war ended and 5 years since he last spoke to another human being except his daughter, Amy. The galaxy knew him as the Butcher of Kepler 442, but Jake just wanted to forget everything he had done during those terrible years of fighting. His hands shook as he reached for another bottle from the metal cabinet beside his bunk. The scars on his arms told stories of battles across 12 star systems where he had killed more aliens than any other human in history. The Terran-Zephyrian War had made him famous, but it had also made him a monster in his own eyes. Every night he saw the faces of the creatures he had killed, and every morning he wondered if Amy would still love him if she knew the real truth about what her father had become. Amy was 19 now and studying at the Luna Academy where she learned about alien biology and culture. She wanted to build bridges between humans and the species that Jake had spent years trying to destroy. Their video calls were the only bright moments in his dark existence, but even those were getting harder as she asked more questions about his past. She knew he had been a soldier, but she did not know that entire alien fleets had changed course just to avoid fighting him. The communication panel beside his bed began to flash with an incoming message. Jake ignored it like he ignored all the other messages from military commanders and government officials who still wanted to use his reputation for their own purposes. The flashing continued for several minutes before finally stopping, and Jake thought whoever it was had given up. Then the panel began flashing again with a priority override code that made his blood run cold. Only 3 people in the galaxy knew that code, and 2 of them were dead. Jake stumbled across the room and activated the message display with trembling fingers. The screen showed Amy's face, but something was wrong with her eyes. They were filled with fear, and she was trying to speak, but no sound came from her lips. Behind her, Jake could see alien figures moving in the shadows, and his daughter was clearly not making this call by choice. The image of Amy disappeared and was replaced by text that burned itself into Jake's memory. The message was simple and direct, like a knife thrust to the heart. It said that the hegemony had taken his daughter from Europa Station during her research expedition. The Alien Alliance wanted Jake to know that the daughter would pay for the father's crimes. They gave him coordinates to a neutral space station where he could surrender himself in exchange for Amy's release, but Jake knew it was a trap. He deleted the message and sat back down on his bunk while his mind began to work in ways it had not worked for 5 years. The guilt and self-pity that had consumed him since the war ended suddenly vanished like smoke in the wind. The broken veteran disappeared, and something much more dangerous took his place. Jake Morrison, the father, was scared and desperate, but Jake Morrison, the soldier, was already making plans. He opened the ship's communication system and began sending coded messages to contacts scattered across the Outer Rim worlds. The first message went to Lisa Hayes, who was teaching tactics at the Mars Military Academy. The second went to Ben Rodriguez, who was working as a civilian engineer on Proxima Station. The third message was the hardest to send because it went to Alex Turner, who had been his closest friend during the war, but had not spoken to him since Amy's mother died. Each message contained the same simple information about Amy's kidnapping and the same request for help. Jake knew he was asking these people to throw away their new lives and probably die with him in whatever plan he came up with. But he also knew they would come because they had all loved Amy since she was a little girl, and they understood what family meant to soldiers who had lost everything else. After sending the messages, Jake walked to the weapons locker that he had not opened in 5 years. His old combat suit hung there like the shed skin of some deadly snake waiting to be worn again. The suit was black and covered with sensor dampeners that made him nearly invisible to alien detection equipment. Beside it hung the weapons that had made him famous across the galaxy, including the custom rifle that could punch through alien armor like it was paper. Jake began to clean and check each weapon with the mechanical precision that had kept him alive through 12 major battles. His hands moved without conscious thought as muscle memory took over from years of combat preparation. The galaxy had forgotten why they used to fear him, but Jake Morrison, was about to remind them that some monsters never truly sleep. He opened a new communication channel and began broadcasting on all frequencies used by the hegemony. His message was short and delivered in the same cold voice that had once negotiated the surrender of entire alien fleets. He told them to return his daughter, unharmed, or remember why they had learned to fear his name. Then he closed the channel and began preparing for war. Lisa Hayes was grading tactical analysis papers when her secure communication device began flashing red. She had not seen that particular signal in 5 years, and for a moment she just stared at the device while her coffee grew cold. The message was from Jake and contained only Amy's picture and coordinates to an abandoned mining station in the asteroid belt. Lisa did not need any other explanation because she had helped raise that girl and would die before letting anything happen to her. She submitted her resignation to the Mars Military Academy within the hour and boarded the first transport heading toward the outer system. Her students probably thought she had lost her mind, but Lisa knew exactly what she was doing. Jake Morrison was calling in old debts, and that meant someone was about to learn why the crew of the Vengeance had been the most feared unit in human space during the war. Ben Rodriguez received his message while working in the engine room of a cargo hauler near Proxima Station. He was covered in grease and cursing at a malfunctioning plasma conduit when his old military communicator started beeping. Ben had kept the device after the war ended, even though he swore he would never use it again. Now he was glad he had, because Jake needed him, and that was all that mattered. He quit his job immediately and began gathering the supplies and equipment he would need for whatever insane mission Jake was planning. Ben knew it would be dangerous because everything Jake did was dangerous, but he also knew they had never failed to complete a mission when they worked together. The old crew of the Vengeance had been more than soldiers during the war, and they were still family even if they had not spoken in years. Alex Turner was the last to respond because he was drunk in a bar on Europa Station trying to forget the anniversary of Amy's mother's death. The message from Jake sobered him up instantly and filled him with a rage that surprised him with its intensity. Alex had delivered Amy when she was born and held her when her mother died. He had loved that little girl like his own daughter, and now someone had taken her. He gathered his medical supplies and the combat drugs that had kept Jake's team alive during the worst battles of the war. Alex knew Jake would need every advantage he could get because the hegemony was not just any enemy. They were a coalition of 3 alien species that controlled most of the galaxy outside human space. Their military was massive and their technology was advanced, but they had never faced Jake Morrison. When he was truly motivated, the 3 former crew members arrived at the mining station within 2 days of receiving Jake's message. They found him working on the Vengeance in a maintenance bay that he had rented under a false name. The ship looked better than it had in years because Jake had been working on it non-stop since sending his messages. Every weapon system had been checked and upgraded, and the hull had been reinforced with stolen military armor plating. Jake explained what had happened to Amy while his friends listened in shocked silence. The hegemony had taken her from Europa Station during what was supposed to be a routine research expedition. They were holding her on a prison moon called Fortress Cathmara in the heavily defended Spiral Arm sector. No human ship had ever penetrated their defenses and returned to tell about it. Lisa studied the intelligence reports that Jake had gathered through his criminal contacts and shook her head in disbelief. Fortress Cathmara was surrounded by 3 layers of defensive satellites and patrolled by over 200 alien warships. Even if they could somehow reach the prison moon, they would never be able to fight their way out again. It was a suicide mission, and they all knew it, but Jake had not called them together to launch a frontal assault on the most heavily defended installation in alien space. He had something else in mind, and as he explained his plan, the others began to understand why the galaxy still feared his name. Jake was not thinking like a military commander planning an attack, but like a father planning a rescue. The difference was subtle but important. Ben would modify the Vengeance to look like an automated cargo hauler using false transponder codes and sensor dampeners. Lisa would calculate patrol routes and guard rotations to find the narrow window they would need to dock with the fortress undetected. Alex would prepare medical supplies and combat stimulants for what would certainly be a bloody extraction once they were discovered. Jake would handle the infiltration itself because he was the only one among them who could move through an alien facility without being detected. His years of studying enemy tactics and technology during the war had taught him exactly how different alien species thought and reacted. He knew their weaknesses and blind spots better than they knew them themselves. The plan was insane and would probably get them all killed, but it was also their only chance of saving Amy. The hegemony expected Jake to either surrender himself or launch a desperate military assault on their fortress. They were prepared for both scenarios, but they were not prepared for what Jake actually intended to do. He planned to infiltrate Fortress Cathmara the same way he had infiltrated dozens of alien installations during the war. He would get inside their defenses through deception and misdirection, then eliminate any threats between him and his daughter. The difference was that this time he would not be trying to gather intelligence or plant explosives. This time he would be trying to bring his little girl home. Jake distributed weapons and equipment to his team while explaining the final details of his plan. Each person had a specific role to play and specific contingencies to follow if things went wrong. They would have one chance to rescue Amy, and if they failed, she would probably be executed and they would certainly be dead, but failure was not an option for Jake Morrison because Amy was the only good thing left in his life. She represented hope for a future where humans and aliens could coexist peacefully. She was everything he had fought to protect during the war and everything he lived for now that it was over. The hegemony had made the mistake of threatening what mattered most to the galaxy's deadliest human, and they were about to learn why that was such a terrible idea. The Vengeance drifted through space like a ghost ship while Ben made final adjustments to their disguise systems. The old battlecruiser now appeared to be a simple cargo hauler carrying processed minerals to Fortress Cathmara. Her weapons were hidden behind false hull plating, and her crew was concealed in shielded compartments that Alex had designed to block alien scanners from detecting human life signs. Jake stood in the cargo bay, wearing his old combat suit and checking his weapons. One final time. The black armor made him nearly invisible against the darkness of space, and its sensor dampeners would help him avoid detection once he was inside the alien fortress. His custom rifle hung across his back along with enough ammunition to fight a small war. He carried enough explosives to level a city block and enough medical supplies to treat serious wounds in the field. Lisa monitored the approach vectors from the bridge while Ben piloted their ship along the shipping lane that led to the prison. Moon. They had studied the traffic patterns for weeks and identified the exact time window when their fake cargo hauler would blend in with legitimate merchant vessels. The hegemony used automated systems to process routine deliveries, and Jake was counting on alien overconfidence to get them past the outer defenses. The first checkpoint came 3 hours after they entered hegemony space when a patrol of HFY fighters intercepted their ship for a standard inspection. The insectoid aliens were known for their rigid adherence to military protocol, and their scanners probed every inch of the Vengeance looking for contraband or weapons. Ben held his breath while the alien sensors passed over their hidden compartments, but Alex's shielding held, and they were cleared to continue toward the fortress. Cathmara appeared on their screens like a small metal moon bristling with defensive weapons and communication arrays. The installation housed over 10,000 alien personnel and served as both a maximum security prison and a military command center. Jake had studied every detail of its construction from stolen intelligence reports, and he knew exactly which ventilation shafts would allow him to move through the facility undetected. Their cargo ship was directed to Docking Bay 7, where automated systems would unload their fake mineral shipment. Jake waited in the cargo hold while the docking clamps engaged in atmospheric pressure equalized between the ship and the station. He had 17 minutes before the automated unloading sequence would reveal that their cargo containers were actually filled with sensor jamming equipment and explosive charges. The docking bay doors opened and Jake slipped out of the cargo hold like a shadow moving through the darkness. His suit's stealth systems made him invisible to most alien sensors, and his years of combat Experience allowed him to move without making any sound. The Vex-High guards at the loading dock never knew he was there as he climbed into the ventilation system and began working his way deeper into the fortress. Jake had memorized the layout of every level and corridor during his weeks of planning. He knew which guards would be where at what times, and he had identified the most efficient routes to reach the detention levels where Amy was being held. The alien architects had designed their fortress to keep prisoners inside, but they had not considered the possibility of a human infiltrator who understood their defensive systems better than they did. The first guards Jake encountered were two Sirathi technicians monitoring atmospheric controls in a maintenance corridor. The aquatic aliens never saw him coming as he emerged from an air vent above their heads. His knife found their vital organs before they could raise an alarm, and Jake dragged their bodies into a storage closet where they would not be discovered for hours. He continued through the fortress like death, itself moving between shadows and eliminating any alien who might discover his presence. Each kill was quick and silent and calculated to delay discovery for as long as possible. Jake had learned during the war that the key to successful infiltration was not avoiding the enemy, but making sure they never realized you were there until it was too late. The fortress began to show signs that something was wrong when entire guard shifts simply vanished without explanation. Security protocols required regular check-ins every 30 minutes, but Jake had timed his movements to create gaps in their communication schedule. By the time the aliens realized their guards were missing, he would already be deep inside their supposedly impregnable prison. Ben monitored alien communications from the cargo ship, while Lisa prepared emergency escape routes in case their extraction went wrong. They could hear increasing concern in the alien transmissions as more guards failed to report in on schedule. The fortress was slowly realizing it was under attack, but they could not identify the source of the threat or determine how many enemies they were facing. Jake reached the outer perimeter of the detention section after 2 hours of careful movement through maintenance tunnels and service corridors. The prison levels were more heavily guarded than the rest of the fortress because they contained the most dangerous criminals in hegemony space. Amy was somewhere beyond those guards, and Jake would kill every alien between him and his daughter if necessary. He planted the first of his explosive charges on a power junction that controlled the detention level's communication systems. When the charge detonated, it would cut off all contact between the prison guards and the fortress command center. The explosion would also trigger automatic lockdown procedures that would trap the guards inside the detention section with Jake. The second explosive went on the main life support processor for the detention levels. Jake was not trying to kill the prisoners, but he wanted to create enough chaos and confusion to cover his rescue attempt. When the life support failed, the automatic systems would begin evacuating prisoners to safer areas of the fortress, and Amy might be among them. Jake activated the charges and began his final approach to the cell where intelligence reports indicated his daughter was being held. He had come too far and killed too many aliens to fail now. The galaxy's deadliest human was about to remind the hegemony why they had learned to fear his name during the war. Amy was somewhere in the darkness ahead, and Jake would burn down the entire fortress to bring her home safely. The explosions began 30 seconds later, and the detention section plunged into chaos as alarms echoed through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. Jake moved through the confusion like a predator hunting prey, and every alien who stood between him and his daughter learned why their species had nightmares about human soldiers. Amy Morrison woke to the sound of distant explosions and the flicker of failing lights in her cell. She had been a prisoner for 3 weeks and had grown used to the routine of interrogation sessions and psychological pressure from her hegemony captors. But this was different because the aliens seemed genuinely frightened as they ran through the corridors outside her cell, shouting orders in their strange languages. The detention section had been designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in alien space, and Amy's cell was deep in the maximum security area. Her captors had not told her why she was being held, but she suspected it had something to do with her father's reputation during the war. The aliens kept asking her questions about human military capabilities and seemed disappointed when she could not provide the answers they wanted. Jake moved through the prison like a force of nature, destroying everything between him and his daughter. The explosive charges he had planted throughout the fortress created chaos and confusion while he systematically eliminated guard posts and security checkpoints. Each explosion was carefully timed to drive the aliens toward predetermined areas, where Jake could deal with them more efficiently. The HFY guards who tried to stop him learned why human soldiers had been so feared during the war. Jake's combat suit made him nearly invisible, and his weapons could penetrate their chitinous armor like it was paper. He moved between shadows and struck without warning, leaving behind only the bodies of aliens who had chosen to stand between him and Amy. The Fortress Command Center finally realized they were not dealing with a prison riot or equipment malfunction, but with a deliberate attack by someone who understood their systems better than they did. The alien commanders began sealing blast doors and activating defensive protocols, but Jake had anticipated their responses during his weeks of planning. Every countermeasure they employed had been factored into his infiltration route. Amy heard the sound of weapons fire growing closer to her cell and began to hope that someone was coming to rescue her. She had been trained in basic self-defense at the academy, but nothing had prepared her for the psychological strain of imprisonment by hostile aliens. The interrogation sessions had been designed to break her spirit, but Amy was Jake Morrison's daughter, and she had inherited more than just his DNA. The Sci-Fi technicians who controlled the prison's environmental systems were the next to discover why the galaxy had learned to fear humans during the war. Jake eliminated them with the same cold efficiency he had shown throughout his infiltration, and then used their control panels to flood entire sections of the fortress with knockout gas. The gas would not kill the aliens, but it would incapacitate them long enough for Jake to complete his mission. Jake reached the final checkpoint before Amy's cell and found his greatest challenge waiting for him. A Threnody commander called Crystal Song of Endings had been studying human warfare specifically to counter Jake's methods and had positioned itself between Jake and his daughter. The crystalline alien was protected by energy shields and carried weapons designed to exploit human physiological weaknesses. The battle was brief but vicious, as Jake faced an opponent who actually understood how humans fought. Crystal Song of Endings had studied recordings of Jake's previous battles and knew his preferred tactics and strategies. But the alien had made one critical error in its analysis, because it had studied Jake the soldier when it should have been preparing to face Jake the father. Jake used the fortress's own architecture against his opponent, turning gravity generators and atmospheric processors into weapons that the alien had not anticipated. He had spent years learning how to fight in alien environments, and he understood their technology better than most of the creatures who had built it. When Crystal Song of Endings finally fell, it was not to superior firepower, but to human creativity and adaptability. Amy heard her cell door explode inward, and saw a figure in black combat armor standing in the smoke and debris. For a moment she did not recognize the man who had come to rescue her, because this was not the broken veteran who had been hiding on Titan Station. This was Jake Morrison, the soldier, and Amy finally understood what her father had been during the war years. Jake checked Amy for injuries, while keeping his rifle trained on the corridor behind him. She was hurt, but not seriously, and she could walk, which meant they had a chance of reaching the Vengeance before the aliens regrouped. But the hardest part of the mission was still ahead, because getting into the fortress had been easier than getting out would be. The fortress was now fully alert, with every remaining guard and automated system hunting for the intruders. Jake had destroyed most of their communication systems, but the aliens were adapting quickly and closing off escape routes throughout the facility. He would have to fight his way back to the docking bay while protecting Amy, and that meant revealing himself to every enemy in the fortress. Jake gave Amy a small pistol and showed her how to use it while explaining their escape route through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. She had never fired a weapon in combat, but she was Jake Morrison's daughter, and she would learn quickly, or they would both die in this alien prison. The next phase of their escape would test everything Jake had taught her about survival. They moved through the fortress together while Jake eliminated threats with ruthless precision, and Amy watched her father become the legend that aliens still feared. Every decision resulted in alien deaths, and every corridor they traversed became a killing field where Jake's experience and training overcame superior numbers and firepower. Amy began to understand the weight her father had carried since the war ended. The detention section was now filled with knockout gas and the bodies of aliens who had tried to stop them. Jake had turned the fortress's own defenses against its defenders and created a path of destruction that would be remembered throughout hegemony space. But they were still trapped inside enemy territory with limited ammunition and no backup plan. If their escape route was compromised, Ben had the Vengeance's engines running hot and ready for immediate departure, but their extraction was complicated by the arrival of a hegemony patrol fleet. Lisa took control of the ship's weapon systems and prepared for the battle that would determine whether they lived or died. The most dangerous part of their mission was about to begin as they tried to fight their way out of the most heavily defended system in alien space. Jake carried Amy through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting while alien voices echoed from every direction around them. The fortress was now fully alert and every remaining guard was converging on their position, but Jake had planned for this contingency during his weeks of preparation. He knew exactly which route would take them back to the docking bay, and he had left explosive charges along alternate paths to slow down their pursuers. Amy clutched the pistol Jake had given her and tried not to look at the bodies they passed in the corridors. She had never seen death on this scale, and the clinical efficiency with which her father eliminated threats was both terrifying and fascinating. This was Jake Morrison in his element, and Amy finally understood why entire alien fleets had changed course to avoid fighting him during the war. The first group of Vexhi reinforcements appeared at the end of a maintenance corridor, and Jake eliminated them with precise rifle fire that found the weak spots in their chitinous armor. Amy watched her father move and shoot with mechanical precision while keeping her protected behind his armored bulk. Each shot was calculated to kill instantly and conserve ammunition for the battles still to come. Ben Rodriguez had the Vengeance ready for immediate departure, but their escape was complicated by the arrival of 6 hegemony warships that had responded to the fortress's distress calls. The alien vessels formed a blockade around the prison moon and began deploying fighters to search for the infiltrators. Lisa Hayes studied the tactical display and realized they were facing impossible odds even if Jake and Amy reached their ship safely. Jake activated more explosive charges as they moved through the fortress, creating diversions and blocking pursuit routes behind them. The aliens were adapting to his tactics faster than he had expected, and he could hear organized search teams coordinating their efforts through handheld communicators. Time was running out, and they still had 3 levels to traverse. Before reaching the docking bay where Ben was waiting, Amy stumbled on debris from one of Jake's explosions, and he caught her before she fell while maintaining his watch on the corridor ahead. She was injured and exhausted, but she was also Jake Morrison's daughter, which meant she would keep moving until they reached safety or died trying. Her father had trained her for survival even if he had never told her about the darker aspects of his military service. The Sirathi guards who tried to ambush them in a flooded maintenance tunnel learned why human soldiers had been so effective against aquatic opponents during the war. Jake's weapons were designed to function in any environment, and his combat suit provided life support even underwater. The alien ambush became a slaughter as Jake turned their own element against them. Lisa activated the Vengeance's weapon systems and began targeting the closest hegemony warship, while Ben plotted evasion courses that would take them through the asteroid field surrounding the prison moon. 1 aging human battlecruiser against 6 alien vessels was not good odds, but they had faced worse during the war and lived to tell about it. The key was using superior tactics to offset the enemy's numerical advantage. Jake reached the docking bay and found it occupied by 2 squads of Threnody soldiers who had been sent to secure the area around suspicious cargo ships. The crystalline aliens were armed with energy weapons and protected by personal shields that could deflect most human firearms. But Jake had spent years learning how to fight opponents who were technologically superior, and he knew their weaknesses. He used flash grenades to overload their optical sensors and then attacked with weapons, designed specifically to penetrate Threnody shielding. The battle was brutal, and Amy watched her father fight with a combination of tactical knowledge and raw violence that left no survivors. By the time the shooting stopped, Jake was covered in alien blood and breathing hard from the exertion of close combat. Ben sealed the docking clamps and began launching the Vengeance while Lisa engaged the first Hegemony warship with everything they had. The old battlecruiser's weapons were upgraded and well-maintained, but they were still outnumbered 6-1 by ships that were faster and more heavily armed. Their only advantage was the experience and skill of the crew who had learned to fight. Impossible odds during the war. Jake strapped Amy into a crash couch in the medical bay while Alex Turner began treating her injuries from 3 weeks of imprisonment and the stress of their escape. She was dehydrated and had several minor wounds, but nothing that would prevent her recovery. Alex gave her sedatives for the pain, but Amy refused to sleep because she wanted to understand what was happening around her. The space battle that followed became a masterclass in asymmetric warfare as Lisa used every trick Jake had taught her to keep them alive against superior numbers. She targeted the enemy ship's weapons and engines instead of trying to destroy them outright, which allowed the Vengeance to disable opponents without wasting precious ammunition. Ben flew the ship like it was part of his own body, dodging enemy fire and using the asteroid field to break up their attack formations. Amy watched the tactical displays while her father coordinated their defense from the bridge and realized that everything he did resulted in hundreds of alien deaths. The man who had rescued her was the same man who had become known throughout the galaxy as its most efficient killer. Each command he gave was calculated to maximize enemy casualties while minimizing risk to his own crew. Jake noticed his daughter's growing horror but could not address it while they remained in combat. The Hegemony fleet was pressing their attack, and more ships were arriving from other sectors of alien space. The aliens had made Amy's kidnapping personal, and Jake was responding the only way he knew how, by ensuring they regretted that decision. The battle reached its climax when Lisa managed to disable the lead Hegemony warship by targeting its power core with a precision shot that Jake had calculated during their escape from the fortress. The alien vessel exploded in a burst of energy that temporarily blinded the sensors of the remaining ships and gave Ben the opening he needed to break through their blockade. The Vengeance limped toward human space with 3 of its 4 engines damaged and hull breaches on multiple levels, but they were alive and Amy was safe. Behind them, the Hegemony fleet regrouped and began pursuit, but Jake knew they would not follow into Terran territory where human patrols might intercept them. The rescue mission had succeeded, but the real consequences were just beginning. Amy finally fell asleep from exhaustion and medication while Jake sat beside her bed and tried to process what had happened. He had saved his daughter, but in doing so he had reminded the galaxy why they used to fear him. The Hegemony would not forget or forgive what he had done, and they would certainly demand justice for the destruction he had caused. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Luna Station and watched Earth turn slowly below him while Amy recovered in the medical facility behind him. They had been back in human space for 2 weeks, but Jake knew their ordeal was far from over. The Hegemony had branded him a war criminal for the destruction of Fortress Kethmara and the deaths of over 3,000 alien personnel during his rescue mission. They were demanding his extradition and threatening to resume hostilities if the Terran government refused to cooperate. Amy had been cleared by the doctors, but the psychological scars from her imprisonment would take longer to heal. She had spent hours in debriefing sessions with military intelligence officers who wanted to know everything about Hegemony prison procedures and interrogation techniques. But the hardest conversations were the ones she had with her father about what she had witnessed during their escape from alien space. The Terran government was divided about how to respond to Hegemony demands. Some officials wanted to maintain the fragile peace that had existed since the war ended, even if it meant sacrificing Jake to alien justice. Others argued that surrendering a human citizen would set a dangerous precedent and encourage future alien aggression. The debate raged in closed sessions while Jake waited for their decision. Alex Turner had examined Amy's medical records and confirmed that her captors had used psychological torture, techniques designed to break human resistance. The aliens had not physically harmed her, but they had tried to destroy her spirit through isolation and constant interrogation. The fact that she had survived 3 weeks of such treatment was a testament to her strength and her father's training. Lisa Hayes was analyzing intelligence reports about hegemony fleet movements near the border between human and alien space. The military situation was tense because both sides were preparing for the possibility that negotiations would fail and combat would resume. Jake's rescue mission had reminded everyone involved why the previous war had been so brutal and destructive. Then, Rodriguez was working on repairs to the Vengeance while Jake decided what to do next. The old battlecruiser was battle-damaged but still functional and could serve as either an escape vessel or a weapon depending on what Jake chose. His crew was ready to follow him wherever he led, but they all understood that their next decision could determine the fate of human-alien relations for generations. Jake finally had the conversation with Amy that both of them had been avoiding since their return to human space. She confronted him about the violence she had witnessed during their escape and asked him to explain how the loving father who had raised her could kill so efficiently and without apparent remorse. The conversation was painful for both of them, but necessary if they were going to rebuild their relationship. Jake explained that everything he had done was to bring her home safely and that he would make the same choices again if necessary. He told her about the weight he carried from his actions during the war and how her mother's death had nearly destroyed him. Amy represented hope for a future where humans and aliens could coexist peacefully, and Jake would do anything to protect that future even if it meant becoming a monster again. Amy struggled to reconcile the different aspects of her father's personality, but she finally understood the burden he had carried since the war ended. She realized that his exile on Titan Station had not been about guilt over past actions, but about protecting her from the consequences of his reputation. The galaxy's deadliest human had been trying to give his daughter a chance at a normal life. The Terran government finally announced their decision to reject hegemony demands for Jake's extradition. The official statement declared that no human citizen would be surrendered to alien justice for actions taken to rescue a kidnapped family member. The announcement was carefully worded, but everyone understood that it meant the fragile peace between humans and aliens was effectively over. Jake knew the hegemony would not accept the government's decision and would eventually take military action to force his surrender. He could not allow his actions to trigger another war that would cost millions of lives on both sides. There was only one way to resolve the situation without destroying the future that Amy represented, and Jake knew what he had to do. He explained his final plan to Amy and his crew while they prepared the Vengeance for one last mission into alien space. This time Jake would not be infiltrating an enemy installation to rescue someone, but to deliver a message that would end the crisis permanently. He would go directly to the Hegemony Council and make them an offer they could not refuse. The plan was insane, but it was also the only way to protect both Amy and the peace that so many people had died to achieve. Jake would penetrate the most heavily defended system in alien space and confront the ruling council that had ordered his daughter's kidnapping. His message would be simple but devastating effective. Amy begged her father not to go on what was obviously a suicide mission, but Jake had already made his decision. He had spent 5 years in exile trying to escape his past, but now he understood that some responsibilities could never be abandoned. The galaxy's deadliest human had one final duty to perform, and he would not let fear or sentiment prevent him from protecting what mattered most. The Vengeance departed Luna Station under cover of diplomatic immunity that would expire the moment they entered hegemony space. Jake's crew knew they were probably flying to their deaths, but they also knew their captain had never failed to complete a mission when the stakes were this high. They had saved Amy, but now they had to save the peace that her generation would inherit. Jake activated long-range communications and sent a message to the Hegemony Council announcing his intention to surrender himself in exchange for a guarantee that Amy would never be harmed, and that peaceful relations between humans and Aliens would continue. But his real message was hidden in the way he had penetrated their most secure communication channels without being detected. The subtext was clear to anyone who understood tactics and strategy. If Jake Morrison could reach their private communications, he could reach their leaders just as easily. The galaxy's deadliest human was offering them a choice between peace and the complete destruction of everything they had built. The aliens could accept his terms or face the consequences of threatening his family again. Amy watched her father's ship disappear into hyperspace and prayed that his final gamble would succeed. Jake Morrison was going to remind the hegemony council why their species had learned to fear human determination during the war. But this time he was fighting not for victory, but for the chance to give his daughter the peaceful future she deserved.